So first of all, great to be with all of you here today. My name is Christian, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of 50 Skills. And today we're going to be talking about AI in hiring, some practical tips, ready to use prompts for TA professionals. So really excited about this today. I'm going to be using a couple of slides and some examples to go into, but also raise your hand. Let me know if you have any questions. So my team will notify me if that happens, so we can get some fun and interesting dialogue near the end of it or in between during the webinar itself. So let me just go ahead here and share my screen really quickly. And you should be able to see some slides here on your screen right now. So first of all, if you kind of talk about AI screening, what are we actually talking about? I think the reality is that a lot of people feel that they're overwhelmed by the number of job applications that are coming in. There might be hundreds of people applying for a single role. And if you're in TA and you're hiring a lot of people, that might be a bigger burden than it used to be. Like in the old days, kind of had this setup where people would just put a poster in the window and people would kind of line up and you'd interview people. And then once you had the right qualified person, you'd kind of move along. Then we've had this long period now of people using typically some sort of an ATS to kind of streamline the process and get people through the door. But what we seem to be seeing is that there's a lot more people applying for each job out there. We've been getting some kind of intel from our customers, from other people in the market, that it looks like the applicants themselves are also using AI when they're applying for jobs. They're getting AI to write their job descriptions. They're getting AI to write the personal letters that get sent with the job descriptions, and often to fill out all the questions and answers that are out there. So on top of that, you also have a bunch of new tools out there that people are buying access to, where you can basically pay a certain amount of money on a monthly basis, and these services will apply for jobs for you and just notify you whenever you have an interview. So that's definitely a big burden happening in the market right now. It's also going over these can be quite time consuming. So if we're just talking about the problematic part, like you can see on the slide here with, going over a document, and you're kind of trying to figure out, is this someone who I feel should go forward in our process? How exactly does an AI sifter do that? What's the instructions that he's using, who he or she is using? And it often feels like it's a very kind of redundant task to do. And very time consuming when you have these many extra applicants applying for each job. And then there's, of course, the basic risk here. It can take a while to go through all the applications. And there's different methods. Some people, they want to go through an application the second someone applies. Others, they want to wait until you've kind of had the entire batch apply, and then maybe have a group of people reviewing the CVs, maybe even multiple people going over each and every single CV to go through it. But the challenge is that often you have the risk of losing top talent. The recent research earlier this year that came out that typically the people who are considered being the top talents in the market typically find a new job within a 10-day period from the moment they kind of start thinking about it. So if these people are kind of involved in applying for a job and getting reviewed, there's a big risk that if you have a really cumbersome process, that they'll never kind of make it through the filter for you as an employer. So these are some of the things that people are concerned about. And this has kind of come in the dialogue recently with the rise of AI. Can we use AI to screen applications? Can we use it to screen CVs, to resumes, all the info we have about an application or all the applications for a certain job, and somehow help in that process? For example, in the early stages when someone applies for a job and it just gets sifted. And I think here the question is, there's a lot of dialogue around it. What are you allowed to do, and how would it potentially work if you set it up in the right manner? And we're going to walk through some of the steps of the key dialogues that have been taking place. Now, if we just look at the AI sifting, what people are typically talking about, what they wanted to do is can we use an AI to automatically, someone applies, either the second they apply, once everyone has applied, can we somehow automatically sift that application and come to a conclusion that it's someone that's fit for the next step in our funnel for a human recruiter to review it. What's the quality of someone doing that? Does that match human accuracy? If you have a data set of 100 people or thousands of people that you've already reviewed, you've given them a certain type of rating, how would that compare to what some sort of a workflow or an AI tool could do? Is it comparable? Are they getting the same results? Is it better? Is it worse? And some of the interesting facts there. We've conducted some research on this part on our own with some data sets, and it's really interesting to see that it is definitely possible to construct and build a certain type of workflow where the AI can reach the same results as humans, as long as you really spend time on thinking how that workflow is structured, you really thought about the prompts that are being used, and you built in a certain type of way. So I think that's the big question. If you can kind of spend, if one individual is able to go over maybe 50 or 100 applications per day, and if you're really in the place where you have a lot of quantity of people coming in, if you are able to do this in a fraction of that time, seconds with technology, and you get the same results, and you're doing it in a respectable manner, it's completely legal how you set it up, and the structure is right, the benefits are pretty high. So I think it's reasonable that people are thinking about this. And then it kind of comes to, could the AI somehow just give you that instant shortlist of all the qualified candidates that kind of come in? And so this is the big dialogue, like kind of these two sections that I'm going to cover a little bit today, how it would work, and some of the topics and dialogues that come from this and around this. So if I just go for the overview of the AI here, I'm just gonna put this up here, like a smaller window. The overview of AI, if you just look at, when people talk about AI, like what are they exactly talking about? Like what are people referring to? And I think because we've had this rise of new applications that people are using on a daily manner, that there's it's often confusing to know exactly what people mean. So we've put up this simple kind of grid chart here that explains the AI a little bit better. So if you look at, there's some players in that market, which we might call AI model builders. These are companies that are building typically large language models of AI. And these are the players that are actually building the technology that's typically being used in different products. These companies, the model builders, they have then released a bunch of different products. OpenAI, for example, launched ChatGPT and DALL-E. Anthropic launched Claude. Meta is working on Llama with different versions. And these products, sometimes you can get access to them straight directly. So you can buy a subscribed access to ChatGPT. You can use prompts to send into ChatGPT and get a response. It's very similar how Claude works. But in other cases like Llama and others, like they're typically just used in other products. So the third option is kind of products that are powered by AI. So you might hear a product says, "Oh, our solution uses this to kind of do this with AI." What they typically mean is that they're using one of these AI products or other AI products that have been built by other companies to power a certain type of value for whatever customer they're serving. And in this case, if you look at, for example, Microsoft Copilot, they've been using ChatGPT to power that. Some of the new advancements that Apple has been introducing with Siri, it's actually powered by ChatGPT. Salesforce has been doing a ton of interesting work on the CRM side, using Claude and others. And so in our case, and for almost most vendors out there, they've built a certain product offering, and then they're powering that product offering by the APIs that these products allow for. And this is the reason why I'm bringing this up in the AI sifting context, because there are a ton of ways that you can already start to use AI on your own just by buying a subscription to one of these tools here. So you can kind of go in, buy, I think they have free access, some of them cost $10, $20 a month. They have their own different pricing, but you can basically go in there, you can put in a prompt, it goes into ChatGPT and it gives you a response in the example of ChatGPT. ChatGPT and Claude work very similarly. For example, Claude that's built by Anthropic. And you can basically put in, if we just put in two prompts that are similar here, you might be asking the AI to create a job description for a digital marketing manager. And you put them in on the same time, they roughly deliver very similar results for this kind of a basic prompt with this kind of a structure. And what I wanted to show you here with some practicality is just like some prompts that you can go ahead and use right away in tools like ChatGPT and Claude when it comes to recruiting and other kind of methods. So basically, if you have, if you want to create a job description, for example, you could use a simple prompt like this one here. Go and like you can basically copy paste this text, and I'll make sure to send you the slides with a link to the slides later, so you can copy paste this. But you can copy paste this stuff, put it into ChatGPT, put it into Claude, and you'll get a pretty detailed job description for this particular role. You can replace that with whatever role you're hiring for, and you'll get the results. And this can really, like, just using the tools that are already out there in this type of manner can already amplify a lot of the things that you're doing on a day-to-day, save you a ton of time, clarify a bunch of things. And we have a couple of prompts here in this presentation that might be useful. Like, you might want to then, you know, whenever you're hiring, you might want to post a job on social media, on LinkedIn and other places. And then you can kind of ask the AI to create like a good promotional post for whatever you're doing, copy paste the results, etc. And learning how to use these prompts with these tools for all sorts of use cases can be really beneficial. So we just added a bunch of them here for HR in general, in case any of these might be valuable. But really learning these practical use cases for different things can save you a ton of time. But the part that I wanted to talk to specifically today is when you can actually use this as part of a process that you already have in place. So you might have a recruiting process in mind where people apply for a job, and you've kind of thought up this workflow model of how you can actually build a structural workflow where someone applies for a job, and then automatically or manually you sift them, you get the results, you maybe then move them forward in an ATS, or you do something different depending on what the use case is. And like, how do you actually set those things up in an automated way where it kind of makes sense, where you're talking about dozens or hundreds of applications, because you're not looking at a tool where you can, you know, copy paste a prompt like the ones we're looking at here and putting them in for every applicant. You want to be able to kind of use this in a structured way with a lot of other meaningful things and in between. So in a nutshell, if that's what you're looking to do, or you're kind of wanting to know more about that topic, there are basically 5 steps to set something up in that way to get the results that you want. And I'm going to cover these steps and kind of roughly go over what each of them means. So the first step is just creating a workflow that kind of describes what it is that you want to make sure happens. Then once you've built the workflow, if you want to apply AI, you've got to decide where are you applying that AI, is that in one place or more, and how exactly do the prompts look like that you're using, and what results are you kind of expecting from those prompts. The third part is what we call the result stack. So if you have a bunch of people that have been applying, are you looking to just qualify, like anyone that qualifies move forward one step, or are you looking to look at all the applications and based on the application pool you got for that job to do something unique with that? I'll go a little bit deeper into that in a second. Then you have integrations. So you've built the perfect workflow with kind of the prompts you have in mind and what you want to happen, make sure it happens in the end. But it's also time to really think about the integration parts. Like, how are you getting the information about the applicants? How are they applying? What are you doing with that information? How do you actually integrate with the AI and potentially other tools you use to enrich it, remove PII data, whatever it might be? And how do you get that back into the workflow itself, make it valuable? And then finally, a trigger. Like, do you want this to happen automatically, manually, etc.? So I'll walk through each and every one to kind of go a little bit deeper in what I mean and have some dialogue about that part. So like, if you're talking about just defining a workflow, then if you can think of this as a simple workflow, like actually describing how it should work. And they're kind of like a good method of doing this is just to go over how you actually hire people today. Like, what is your current process for once the person comes in, once you kind of sift the initial applications, what happens in step number 2, 3, 4, etc., ranging from the moment they actually get that job offer sent in their hands. And then review that process and kind of try to figure out, where could I actually improve? Like, what are some of the things that I feel are really painful, really time consuming, and specific things I want to look at? And That might be the job sifting process alone. That might be like getting the right interview questions before the interview, prepping the recruiter before that part. It could be a bunch of different things within that entire workflow. Once you've figured out the workflow and how exactly you want to do things, then it's time to think about the actual AI prompt. So you have the AI prompt, and that could be an instruction to the AI on what it's supposed to do. And the example that you're looking at here is a terrible AI prompt. This is basically giving the AI full control over how it should sift an application. So imagine you have a workflow like the one you can see is a rough example here. Somebody applies for a job, and you want the AI to sift an application. And if it's successful, move it forward. If it's not successful, kind of reject that application. And if you tell it to just analyze the CV, the cover letter, and give a rating between 1 and 10, it's gonna do that. It's gonna give it some sort of rating. But how does it come to that conclusion? You haven't given it any instructions of what does it mean to get a 1? What does it mean to get a 5? What does it mean to get a 7? So you can do it a little bit more detailed and kind of building some basic criteria on like what's important for you, whether it's a clarity, cultural fit, whatever it might be. You can always start to increase that stack of detail. And you can start using like a weighted scoring model, basically saying, okay, these are the 6 categories that matter. This is the percentage for each category. This is sort of the rating. Like if you have a 1 and 2, that means that you're significantly below expectations. And you want to make sure that when you do these prompts, to include things like the actual job description. So you have someone's maybe CV information, you have their cover letter, you might have a bunch of questions and answers, but here you also have more details about the job, potentially more details about the company. And so you can really start to increase these into the type of prompt that creates that value that you're looking for. And you can think of the prompt like instructions for a human recruiter going over your application. So if you would hire someone, or if you're in TA and you're currently sifting applications, like how do you actually come to the conclusion that you come to? You have 100 people apply, and you're just going to decide who moves forward. In your mind, you probably have certain ideas about what is quality. You might have some sort of a weighted score. You might look at things like typos and their background and a ton of different things, like all the experience that you've kind of harnessed over the years. And if you were somehow to create a prompt, the best type of prompt would be the instructions that you give the prompt, if they're similar to what the instructions would be if you're giving that to a human recruiter. And you can always iterate on the prompt to get better results. But this part is really key of making the AI do what you want it to do. Now, the big power here is you can obviously use a prompt like this and just copy paste this into ChatGPT or Claude, and you'll get some results. You can, upload information from one candidate at a time, and you can get some results from that. But the big results kind of come when you actually do this as part of a workflow automatically. So you basically have a workflow built. Let's say that workflow says that in the beginning you want to send instructions to an AI to sift an application. That sends that information to, in this case, ChatGPT. The prompt gets run through, a detailed prompt like some of the quality ones that we looked up, more qualitative ones that we looked at there 2 slides ago. It reviews the applications, reviews the CV, the whole details, and it comes to the conclusion that this is someone that should move forward in a process. So the beauty about doing it this way is that if it's a workflow, if you have a workflow tool of some sort where you can build these workflows out, you can add prompts as part of the workflow, then you're able to actually do this as part of a process. Now, if you can then of course review it like you do any proper machine to make sure that once you've done this 1,000 times to make certain types of research tests, checking if the applications, if the AI is always doing what you want it to do, etc. But kind of the key thinking here is that the value really gets unlocked once you can start to do this at scale. And I'll go a little bit deeper when you kind of walk through the entire process of how that kind of hangs together. The next step is the result stack. So as I mentioned before, you might have a bunch of applications that have come through, all of these, but what are you looking to do? Are you looking to qualify just if you're good enough to pass the initial sifting stage? does that mean that you just move forward? If an AI can figure that out, does that mean you move forward? Or do you only want to look at, let's say, the top 20% of all applications? So if you have 100 applications, you just want the AI to figure out who the top 20%, move those forward based on the others that applied within a certain role. Or in some cases, do you just want to move the person forward that's the first one to qualify? Kind of the old queue model that you can think of from back in the days when you had kind of posters in the window kind of thinking. So these are very different methods, and based on your SIFT stack, like what is it that you're trying to do with this? Are you trying to just find the first qualified person that comes through the door, find the best candidates out of everyone that applied, or to take a look at all those that just qualify the minimum requirements or certain requirements that you have? Then it comes to the result stack. That's the result stack. Then it comes to the integration part. So you have figured out a process, right? You figured out how you want the process to be, how you want it to work, and you're sort of trying to figure out, okay, like how do I actually do this? So you might have an ATS of some sort, like an applicant tracking system that you purchased, which is typically the tool that you use to, you have a career site and you kind of create jobs that appear on the career site. People apply, and once they've applied, you kind of use that tool to sift through the applications. Now, one option is to use your existing ATS, like don't switch it out, just use your existing ATS and then use an integration from that ATS to a workflow builder that you use that can kind of do those prompts that I described with the AI and then move that back into the ATS. So sort of like once someone applies, do that workflow where it checks with the AI of sifting applications, and if they qualify, move them forward one step, or somehow add that data into the ATS in a way that works for you. That's one way to do it. You could also, if you don't have these integrations in place, you can of course bulk import or export information, put that into the workflow tool that you're using and kind of get it back out. But this is sort of the thinking method and the structure of how to do it. Then there's a question of what happens next. So you have this process where you kind of put information into the AI. The AI checks if something is supposed to move forward or not. And if it is supposed to move forward, there's probably other things that you might want to make sure it does. You might want to move stages in ATS for an application. You might want to send someone automatically an invite for an interview. Once that happens, you might want to message somebody on your team or different teams with information that something went through. You might want to do reminders. Like there's a ton of different steps. And typically these workflow builders are tools that you can use to do that if someone moves forward. Now, if they don't move forward, this might be completely different. You might also want to move them into other stages in ATS, but definitely not move ahead maybe with the other tasks and actions that are involved on the slide here. Then is the fifth final step when you're kind of structuring this workflow, and that's the trigger. So basically a trigger means like, how do you actually want this to take place? So are you going to just sift applications manually? Like you could do it one at a time with prompts and the tools that you kind of have access to, or you could do like a bulk, all of the people in a certain place in ATS, put them through a workflow. Are you going to have like a form that people fill out? Like, I don't know, second you will fill out a job application form, for example, it could automatically trigger something to get sifted with an automation. Or you could have a recruiter even fill out a form like, hey, like sift all of these applications for me once I send them through. Or you're going to use an API, meaning you might have an existing tool, an ATS, HRIS, whatever it might be, and you're just going to kind of do certain actions within that system that's going to automatically push your workflow through, do all the sifting that you want. And there's two ways of kind of approaching this, and I think this hasn't been talked about too much. But I think when you're if you're whiteboarding this, if you kind of have a whiteboard and you're kind of mapping up exactly how you want these things to work, there's one method of doing it which is completely autonomous by the AI, and then there's the way of doing it where you get support from the AI, but it has kind of human supervision. So if we just take a look at that part, like let's say that it's completely autonomous. So you have an AI process where you basically run a prompt. The AI will analyze if someone is qualified or not to progress in a process that you built out, a recruiting process for yourself. And if the AI says that someone is qualified, then automatically that person might get sifted, moved forward in one stage. And if not, they might get rejected. And there's a completely different split, a tree branch split there about what will happen. So that's one option. Another option is to implement a workflow where you do the same thing, like you push a certain prompt as part of a workflow. The AI comes to a certain conclusion and wants to push a certain decision through, but instead of doing it automatically, it will actually send that suggestion to a human recruiter. So a human recruiter is going over an application, and the second the human kind of does it, it can see, okay, the AI thinks this one is qualified or not. If the human agrees, they can move forward. If not, then it goes the other way. So basically, you start to use this as some sort of a sidekick, as a co-pilot next to you. A lot of vertical applications that are used in, for example, in the medical field work this way. Like a physician might be doing a certain type of image scan, and it might use an AI to kind of review exactly what it's doing. If the AI doesn't agree, then the physician can kind of decide on its own if it feels it should continue despite the AI disagreeing or not. So this is sort of like a sidekick method. And a lot of times what you might do here is that you might actually have build a process that you want, and you might run it with human supervision to begin with. But the trick is, if you run this process 1,000 times and the AI always agrees with you, like you're 99.9% of the time, a human recruiter and the AI comes to the same conclusion. And at some point, you might want to just put on the full automated part. And I think so it's a very healthy way of, when implementing AI, to really think about these two options, often starting with the human supervision. Once you feel that's really gotten to a place that you're comfortable with, then you can kind of put on full automation with it. And then, of course, there's the big dialogue that everybody talks about. It's also just the legal and the responsible usage of this. Like, what's allowed to do, and what's a responsible way of doing it. And as many of you might know, there's an act in Europe called the EU AI Act, recently published now in August, came through. And this is regulation where it basically talks about the importance of responsible AI. And there's a few interesting finds here. Like, one of the important finds from this act is that it really aims to ensure that AI systems are used ethically. So especially where in HR, where you can really impact people's livelihood. So where are you applying the AI? How have you structured the workflows? How have you structured the prompts? Are you using this as a sidekick for a human recruiter? Are you putting full autonomy on it? And kind of really being thoughtful about those processes. There's also, in the act itself, emphasis on transparency, explainability, and human oversight in AI systems. And thirdly, there are mentions of certain just purely prohibited practices, which includes things like emotion recognition and biometric categorization in the workplace. So these are some things that's really important to just think about. Like, globally, this is the kind of large move from Europe. Europe is stricter than the US, for example, a little bit stricter than the UK, although it's very similar. And these are definitely things to consider, like what's happening on the legal side. There's a lot of uncertainties as well. Like, there's a lot of things that haven't been discussed or kind of gone through on the depths of how certain things will be tackled. But EU definitely has put this out there as a way of really controlling what we can use AI in, how we can use it, and start to have that structured paper process moving forward. We've also, just based on a lot of the dialogues that we've seen, there's been a lot of webinars, a lot of talks, meetings and conferences, and dialogues around the world about what is responsible usage of AI when it comes to things like HR, sifting applications, etc. And there's a couple of things that we really want to kind of put down as guiding paths when talking about this. And one of the things is responsibility. Like, I think it's really important to be conscious of the potential impact that AI can have on people and on society. And it involves careful consideration of fairness, safety, compliance throughout the entire AI lifecycle. Step number two is just the transparency part. So basically, it is so important that you allow people to understand how you're using AI, including all the data that's being used and all the processes to make decisions. So how does that workflow actually look like? Where are you actually using the AI, and what decisions do you actually make based on that workflow and the AI usage? And when people can actually see the inner workings of an AI system, it really kind of demystifies the technology, making it way more accessible and predictable than before. And there's a ton of best practices around this, but basically telling people, for example, if they are applying for a job, hey, we are planning on using AI for the regional sifting. This is the way it's used. This is the way our workflow is used. This is the way we're going to move people forward if they progress or not. Are we using this as a kind of guiding light for humans, or is it just fully automated? Like, really explain the part as well as you can and be transparent about the ways you're planning on using it. Maybe have the option of people opting out or automatically have it opt out. People can opt in, whatever method you feel is the right way. But basically keep it transparent in how you're thinking about using in the AI and in what manner. Accountability is also large. And I think it's important to take responsibility for the outcomes of using AI. So basically ensuring that the impacts of what happens is monitored and addressed appropriately. And I think if you're using AI, like if you just take two examples, if you buy access to things like ChatGPT, Claude, and you start to prompt it and get responses and prompt it and get responses, so you do something with it, that's sort of more hidden and not as transparent as if you do it as part of a workflow. So if you've built a certain workflow, you've actually defined exactly where you're using AI, with what prompts, to do what, to get what results. And that's why people move forward or they don't move forward. And you can actually come back to the accountability part, that if something could be done better, something could be improved, you can actually go back to that canvas, improve the workflow, make some iterations, and see the changes come through. So that's definitely something that I think is really important as well. And then the final part, which is just on the ethics. And there are some moral principles here and values during the deployment of AI. Like, it's really important to think about and respect people's privacy, people's respect to private information, structure workflows in a way that you're not doing anything that you don't need, like not using information you don't need to use, and also really to try and avoid bias. There's a ton of bias in humans. Recruiters going over applications, whether it's on paper or when meeting people in person. AI can also have these biases, and it's really important when, for example, prompts are structured, that they're structured in a way to try and prevent these as much as humanly possible. Now, if you built this in a transparent way, where you can have a paper trail and accountability on how it's used everywhere, you can see the prompts that's being used for every single individual going through these processes, and you can iterate on it and really try to get to a point where you built it in a place that feels where it's being used in as much of an ethical way as you can humanly possibly think about. And so these are some of the things I wanted to mention. Now I have room for some questions. I have a bunch of other slides that I can go through as well as use cases here, but I wanted to open the floor as well up for questions around this particular part based on what I'm covering. I'm sure there's a couple of things that you might be interested in learning. So let me just check here with my team if something's coming up here in the comments. And if you have any thoughts so far, you can kind of raise your hand, and I can give you the floor for some of these questions. Just give it a sec here. Yeah, okay, so I have one here, like just an actual example, like how exactly would this work if you set this, okay, practical example of how you can actually make this work. So if I go back to sharing the screen here and just showing, intention wasn't here to do a demo, but just to kind of show you an example of tools that could be used for this kind of thing. So if you have a workflow tool like the one you're looking at here, and if I just go, it's probably easier if I just go like this. So you have an ATS. Let's start there. You have an ATS with a bunch of people that applied for a job, right? And you can click an application and you can kind of review their CVs, you can review their cover letters, and kind of figure out if you feel they should progress or not, move towards the new stage. And you can kind of do that one by one. But what you can also do, similar to what I discussed before, is you can actually take a look at all the people that applied. You can click them with a single click. You can then, if this ATS has an integration, you can actually move it to a workflow builder, and you can kind of put them in a workflow that you kind of structured and add them all with a single click. And once you've done that, these applications, they'll actually start to pop up, like you can see here. Like you'll see all the people that apply for a job in one place, and you can basically sift them one at a time by just kind of clicking start, and it's then going to go ahead and it's going to run a certain prompt on an application. It's going to run through in this case, it's running through a person's CV, and once it's finished that, it's going to automatically go and do the next task, run through and do the cover letter. Once it's done that, it's going to move forward and move the person forward in the ATS if they got the right rank or not. So now, for example, it's finished doing the CV. You can see that they get like a 7 in grade for the CV. We'll see what they do with the cover letter, etc. So you can see how a single individual walks through a workflow where AI is being applied in 2 different instances. And if they get a certain rating, they're going to progress them in the ATS that they're using. And you can do this one person at a time, or you can do it for all the people that move forward. Like in the demo that we have here, if you kind of take a look at the ATS here, like all the people that were in the ATS here, we moved them to this workflow. And now the AI process is sifting each and every single person. You can kind of see it turn green in color once it's finished it. And a couple of seconds, minutes later, this is going to be finished, and it's going to actually progress the people moving through the process. So this is like a real example of how it can be applied. Now, how the actual workflow should work, like maybe you want to have extra steps, maybe you don't want to send in the actual CV or cover letter, maybe you want to somehow anonymize all of that data before putting it in. There's a ton of different ways on how you can structure that workflow. But whatever the workflow is, how it's structured, like think about how you want it to work, think about how you want to build that perfect process, and then you can kind of see the automations at play and the value that they bring. So let me check here if there are any other questions in the Q&A panel. I got a question here. What would be the best way to get a buy-in from senior leaders who think that the current way of working is sufficient? That's a great question that's brought up here. If you want to get buy-in from a senior leader, I think the biggest thing, the most important thing you can do is try to put up a business case for it, and try to use like hard valued things in the business case, like how much money is saved, how much money you can not spend on certain tools, rather than just like time saved, etc. Because often in HR, it becomes kind of like CFOs often don't trust the some of the metrics that come from like time saved and small efficiency. They just want to see the actual numbers. And a great way to do this is to use calculators. So there's a bunch of ways to calculate these things. We even have one here that I can throw up here pretty quickly for AI sifting. If I just click it here, I'm going to share my screen here to show you an actual example. So if I go here for so if I just open up here a simple calculator to show you what I'm talking about, and I can send a link to this calculator as well right after the talk. So let me just share my screen here really quickly. One sec here, sharing. So here, for example, you have a sifting calculator, right? So you're trying to build a business case. How do you get business leaders to understand this? Like one way to think about it is to say, okay, like how big is your organization? And based on the size, if you have a 10% turnover, you might have, like if you're 1,000 people, you might be posting 100 jobs per year. And if you get 100 people applying for each job, that means 10,000 applications. If you can only go through 50 of those or 100 of those a day, that's a lot of days spent in sifting. Whether it's not maybe just for you, maybe for the entire kind of manager suite of people going through it, it's still a lot of time that goes into just that process. And so you can really, in this calculator, you can kind of personalize this. You can kind of put in your own, whatever the size of the company is in terms of number of employees. You can kind of take a look at your turnover. So whatever the turnover is, I mean, we even have some industry averages for comparison. Obviously, this matters what type of jobs you're running, posting and things like that. But you can see some interesting averages here on the turnover. So you can kind of put in your own numbers. Maybe the company is in a growth phase where it's growing or it's shrinking, and you can kind of add whatever those metrics are. And then if you have some data, like maybe it's not 100 people that apply for a job in your case for every single role. Maybe it's more or less. And in some cases, you might even be in an organization where you need to have more than one person that goes over every application. Like some organizations have 2 or 3. So you can kind of put this thing in. And that's the kind of results you get that can kind of get business people to understand this. If you can tell them, look, we're spending 900 hours every single year sifting through applications. We can do that for a much lower cost using new technology. I really recommend we do this. I think we can save X amount of money on it based on these calculations. So you can kind of use these sliders for yourself to get to some conclusion. There's a ton of different calculators out there, obviously, but I think this is like one of the ways to really help. And even send this to the budgeting person, senior leaders, to kind of explain your case. Because if you can save this much time and still get the same results, it really kind of pays up for the benefits there. Checking if there are any other questions here. There's a couple more here, but I think I'll also, just for the sake of time, just take one more. I'm just reviewing these here right now. Yeah, so what about just this one is good. So what's the practical way? What's a practical way to get started? I'm in HR, I don't have a lot of time. How could I, get started up and running with something pre-made? This is a great question. This is like, this comes up really often in some of the dialogues that we have. Sure, there are tools that you can use to build a ton of things if you had all the time in the world to do it, but we're busy. So how do we actually do it? And I think the response here is, there are a bunch of tools out there. I mean, we have some in our own kind of closet of offerings where you can get these things set up for you. So basically, you can have a workflow set up for you. You can have a team of experts that set up the entire thing, and you can kind of get best practice examples out of the box ready in the account right away. For those instances, you can literally just get a product on board. You can kind of go through those 5 steps of just looking at, okay, now you have an example of a workflow. You have an example of a prompt. You have an example of how the sifting process should work. You can put in your own integrations or ATSs that you kind of want to use there. And in the end, you know what the trigger should be to make that happen. So you have these 5 steps out of the box. You can get started. And then when you have time, once you use that for a while, either as using a human in the mix with the AI or just having the AI in full automation, you can start to iterate on it completely on your own. So I definitely recommend, like, if you're just getting started, you don't have time, like, get some of the best practice templates into your account right away, play with those, iterate it to your own needs if you need to, or just test them for a couple of times to kind of see if this is something that works for you. But I'll, in the sake of time and the webinar as well, I'll keep that as the last question. Really hope you enjoyed being with us here today. We discussed basically how you can set up, like, what is AI sifting? How can you automatically review people's CVs to progress in the recruiting process? What are some of the AI technologies out there? How can you implement that technology in the right way for your own process and get started? Hope you really enjoyed it. Don't hesitate to send questions and comments either in the threads, videos, or to our team. I'm looking forward to talking to you all again the next webinar. See you soon.